Thank you for tuning into this Engerati webinar. My name is Rose Bundock and I will be your host for this live session. Before we start, I'd like to go through a couple of housekeeping items. Firstly, this presentation is available to download as a PDF file and also as an MP3 audio file for easy access. The webinar is also available on demand on Engerati, so you can share it with your colleagues. As ever, as we go through today's discussion, if you have any questions, please submit them as we go along and we will tackle as many as we can possible in the allocated time. In this webinar, we'll be discussing how to build a better business case for utility asset investment planning. The webinar will reveal a benefits framework for AIPM, Asset Investment Planning and Management. Our speakers today are Stefan Sadnicki, Managing Director for Europe at Canadian decision analytics company Copperleaf. Stefan works both with Copperleaf partners and directly with asset-intensive organizations to solve their asset investment planning challenges. His background is in business analytics and consulting, and he's an active member of the Institute of Asset Management. Stefan is joined today by Greg Dodd, Head of Asset Strategy at Northern Gas Networks. Greg joined Northern Gas Networks in 2015, and he has worked to establish the strategic asset management plan and balance the role that data systems and the professional and technical experience of people contributes to improved decision making. Stefan and Greg, I'd like to hand over presenting duties to you. We look forward to hearing your presentations.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for joining on a Friday afternoon. We're going to start off, Greg and I will introduce ourselves a little further, and then I'll walk through what we've got planned for the agenda today. So, good afternoon. I'm Stefan Sadnicki. I'm responsible for Copperleaf's operations in Europe. I've been focused on supporting clients improve decision-making within asset management for many years, both as a management consultant and now with Copperleaf. I've experience in gas, water, electrical transmission distribution, and in rail sectors. I've been leading a lot of Copperleaf's research in this area around the business case for improving investment planning capabilities. So exciting to be presenting some of that with you today. Greg?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Greg Dodd from Northern Gas Networks, where I work as the Head of Asset Strategy. We've been working with Copperleaf for the best part of 5 months now, implementing their C55 module to improve both our risk management on asset-specific risk, but then also looking to the development of a longer-term strategic asset management plan to inform our business plan submissions to our regulator, Ofgem, who's the economic regulator of the monopoly utilities in the UK. Prior to joining NGN, I worked for a water company in the UK looking at their asset optimization. So in the transition from water to gas, brought some experience of how the cross-sector approach to asset and investment decision-making works. So today I'm just going to share through the story and a bit of our journey in developing our business case to use these tools and embed this asset management capability, and hopefully it can provide some benefits to your organisation and your journeys as you go through that process.
Great, thanks, Greg. I should say we had hoped to be joined by Miranda as well today, but unfortunately she sends her apologies. In terms of the agenda for the webinar, I'm going to start by providing you with some background to the asset investment planning and management process. I'll then go on to explain why we have developed a benefits framework and highlight a couple of customer case studies that have contributed to the framework development. I'll then present the framework itself and describe the various components, and then I'll hand over to Greg. He'll give you, as he described, an overview from Northern Gas Networks' experience and their recent journey to develop a business case for capability improvement. This serves as a good illustration or validation, so to speak, of our framework. Finally, we'll be available to answer any questions you may have so please make note of these throughout the webinar through the online interface. Fantastic. So firstly, what do we mean by Asset Investment Planning and Management, or AIPM? We see a number of areas where asset-intensive organizations need to be thinking about developing their asset and investment strategies. Firstly, organizations need to be able to understand the risks inherent in their asset base and predict the long-term needs of their assets. Secondly, we see the requirement to optimize investment portfolios to realize the greatest value to the organizations. And finally, these portfolios need to be managed. As things change in the real world, such as a project being deferred, the investment portfolio should be continuously updated. And all of this should be done according to the key principles of ISO 55000, namely a value-based and risk-informed decision-making process. Unfortunately, it's not all simple. There's lots of competing factors involved in the asset investment planning decision-making process. There's lots of risks you're exposed to, be it environmental risks, safety risks, reliability risk, etc. You need to take into account the requirements of your stakeholders, such as shareholders, regulators, and your customers. And then also you'll be operating typically under multiple constraints imposed by your operating context, whether that's a resource constraint or a financial constraint. There's no point in developing an investment plan that theoretically is perfect on paper, but you don't have the means or it's not optimized for delivery. At Copperleaf, we work with organizations to develop value frameworks to provide transparent and consistent methodologies to support asset management decision-making. These value frameworks provide the alignment or line of sight between your organization's strategic objectives and the investment decisions you're making. And it helps you assess the different options you have against all of these different criteria you see on the slide in front of you. We also use our decision support tool, C55, to act as a collaborative and controlled environment that supports this process. We're not going to discuss the value framework in too much detail today, although one of our previous Engerati webinars did touch on this topic in more detail. So I just now want to outline that process we support. So organizations often start by considering their asset base and the associated risks. Predictive analytics can lead to the development of long-term asset strategies on the levels of investments that are required to keep these risks at an acceptable level. This often involves the development of program levels for groups of assets, such as a breaker replacement program or a mains replacement program. Considering now the medium to short-term requirements of the organization, people start to think about specific projects, or what we call investments. It's no longer a generic modelled intervention, but a specific project that can be handed over for delivery. This may involve bundling of multiple assets into a single project that can be delivered together. It's important to note that investments can be sustainment interventions on the existing assets, often to mitigate risks, but also be driven by other requirements, such as load growth or other external influences from the regulator, for example. To give an example, the UK water regulator, Ofwat, set utilities' ambitious targets around resilience within the network. There's lots of activity going on to develop projects to increase the resilience, to reduce the number of properties on single supply. As such, candidate investments need to be considered across the whole portfolio and include diverse groups such as fleet, property, and IT as well. Now, with a value framework in place, organizations are able to assess the value of all of these investments and ultimately optimize the portfolio to develop their investment plans. We see significant benefit in that ability to optimize the plan based on these multiple multiple constraints, in contrast to prioritizing assets or investments based on a single score. And I'll talk about this in a bit more detail in a minute. Finally, as I mentioned before, it's important to keep your plans updated and support a plan, do, check, act mentality. This continuous planning capability allows you to re-optimize plans once things change, and ultimately leads to greater plan stability, greater transparency, and alignment between the planning and delivery functions of your organization. Good. So that was a brief introduction to the asset investment planning and management process. And I just want to give you a bit of context behind the benefits model that we've developed, and give you some examples from the utilities and clients that we've been working with. To provide a bit of context, we've been working with a large number of asset-intensive organizations to improve their asset management decision-making processes. Often when talking to new organizations, we get asked, what is the ROI of improving our capability? Or how can I build a business case to justify the required investment? After all, in a value-based decision-making world, all projects should be justified based on the value they bring to the organization. And that includes capability improvement transformations, such as the projects Greg will go on to describe. So what have we done? We've spoken to our existing clients, and indeed others in the industry too, to understand the benefits they've achieved from improving their processes, and try to bring these together to form a body of evidence that we can provide to the industry to support others on this journey. We've incorporated a cross-sector of global insights across multiple different sectors, and from organizations from North America, from the UK, from Australia, to make sure we've got examples that are applicable across the world. Before diving into the framework itself, I just want to give you a couple of examples. Firstly, we often get lots of great anecdotal feedback. And these are typically qualitative examples that our clients or our partners are talking about or bring back to us once they've implemented process improvements. So, for example, having implemented new capability, one client told us, we just cut $7 million out of our budget and it took us about 30 seconds. And the guys are telling us that it lines up with their engineering judgment. So compare this to situations where it may take you weeks or months to recut a plan. And even then, once you get to the end of the exercise, things have probably changed in the interim. A second example here around staff efficiencies. Often there's lots of what we do around bringing data together in one place, or making sure that people can invest their time more on making better decisions rather than fighting for taking data from one Excel spreadsheet to another. So the example here, bulk updates from other departments, such as project delivery, used to take a couple of days. Now we can do this in just a couple of hours. This one I always find very interesting, highlight number 3, around identifying negative value investments. Now these are projects or programs that when really assessed according to the organization's value framework, they have very low or even negative net value, and in reality do not merit execution. For example, we worked with a US utility, and we supported them develop a value framework and assess their investment plan against that framework. What we discovered that nearly 2% of the portfolio was actually allocated to investments that had negative value. Those could be taken out of the plan without having a a negative effect on the organisation's objectives. What's more, if you'd included all of the projects that we weren't able to evaluate, and that's because the client and their investment planners weren't able to explain the context of why they were doing those projects at all, that percentage increased to nearly 5%. So a considerable volume of projects, perhaps, that have been part of the status quo, that once you've really looked to see whether these align with the objectives of the organisations, can potentially be moved out of the plan, or that money could be spent on somewhere more valuable. Just two more examples. Example here around increasing the portfolio value. We often talk about the optimization benefit. This is the ability advanced analytical techniques can give you to really consider all of these factors, the different complexity factors that I described before, all at one go. We help you understand which projects are the most critical and which are the most urgent. So to help you to decide which projects and when should be carried out. Now this is a multi-criteria problem. And so using advanced analytical techniques such as mathematical optimization and linear programming, it's possible to optimize these plans to maximize value to the organization. This is in contrast to traditional prioritization techniques, where typically a list of projects or a list of assets would be ranked, and one would go down that list until one runs out of money or runs out of a particular resource. We had a number of clients who'd quantified that benefit of saying through the optimization it allowed them to develop a plan which was X% more valuable than their previous methods. But these statistics were almost unique to that organization, to their operating context. So what we did last year, we commissioned a study with the University of Southampton, and one of their master's students undertook a research project to really understand, in a general basis, what is the benefit that optimization can deliver over traditional prioritization. We considered multiple factors, for example, multi-year investment plans, projects that span different years, projects that have multiple alternatives. And that's a great example, because in a prioritization method, you typically just have a single alternative that's being considered. But in optimization, you can consider multiple alternatives. So it's not only which project to select, but which option of that project. And it may be what is locally optimal, or what an investment planner thinks, well, this is the best option for my project. That may very well be true when considering that project in isolation. But when considering the broader portfolio, it may be that it's better to take a different option at that project to provide additional resources elsewhere. And what this study showed that was, depending on certain criteria and the makeup of the portfolio, optimization delivered between 7% and 20% more value in the optimized portfolio compared to the same set of investments that had been prioritized with the same financial constraints. So that's quite a significant benefit, especially when you consider the size of the investment plans that I know a lot of you will be developing. So why do we need an AIPM benefits model? The reality is that not every benefit is relevant to every organisation. We developed a comprehensive body of evidence, but needed a way to present it so that other organisations can review it, understand it, and think further about which elements are most important to them. The framework has incorporated both the qualitative and quantitative examples from across our client base, some of which I've just described. We've also discussed how clients have justified their projects even if they're still in the implementation phase and have yet to realise the benefits. And the example that Greg will talk about is one of those. And finally, we've looked at industry research and commissioned some research of our own, such as that study I just described. So what does the model look like? To start with, and in my previous life as a consultant as well, I have to say, like any good framework, it has lots of boxes on a PowerPoint slide. But what we've tried to do, we've tried to structure this to really make sure that the individual benefit areas can be understood and articulated in a way that everyone can understand and, importantly, can communicate to their stakeholders. So we've got around 15 different benefit measures, and we split these into the 7 categories you can see on the slide at the moment. At the bottom, we see the potential for process efficiencies and cost saving and avoidance. We have 4 pillars, which are related to the improved decision making at different parts of the process. And then we see how the process as a whole leads to improved process outcomes. And I'll describe these in detail. For each of the areas, we've tried to identify specific benefit areas that are SMART, so specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. And as I said, we really want to be able to articulate these so that they're very clear what the benefit is available to the organisation. So taking each of these in turn. Firstly, from a process efficiency perspective, I see organisations spending a huge amount of effort pulling a plan together, or fighting with data from multiple sources, or comparing one version of an Excel spreadsheet to another. Bringing all of that planning data and having a single source of the truth leads to numerous process efficiencies for asset planners, for portfolio owners, and indeed for senior stakeholders reviewing and approving projects or plans. For cost savings and avoidance, some organisations have a temptation to build a solution themselves or maintain an existing system that perhaps not is giving them optimal efficiency. Or maybe they have a reliance to rely on external consultancies to support an inefficient process year in, year out. We firmly believe that by using a proven and mature commercial off-the-shelf solution to support this process, this has the lowest total cost of ownership and acts as a key enabler for the process and for organisations to really realise the quite significant benefits that are on offer. So now considering the 4 pillars we see here. Firstly, from an enhanced risk management perspective. Through appropriate risk tracking and modelling, organisations are able to identify and mitigate previously unknown risks. If you're not carrying out risk assessments and risk managements, you won't know what risks you are exposed to. But by identifying these and putting actions in place to mitigate them, that risk mitigation can be monetised and considered a benefit of process improvement. Moreover, by agreeing appropriate risk thresholds or service levels, utilities can manage their business to an agreed risk profile. Having appropriate risk management process in place allows organisations to choose the right level of risk and therefore investment. It's not simply the case that all risks have to be mitigated down to zero. So moving on to the investment evaluation area. The first box here relates to that example I described previously around reducing expenditure that does not deliver value. It's always interesting to see this when we work with clients and people suddenly realise, you mean we shouldn't do this thing that we've always done because it doesn't add any value to the organisation? The second box here includes improved contributions to the new bottom line. The new bottom line relates to the business case for investing in social or environmental change. I've also heard the term the 5 capitals. That includes social capital, human capital, natural capital, etc. The rationale here is that if you include these components in your value framework, if you're then assessing 2 projects which may traditionally have been given an equal weighting from a financial ROI perspective, you're now more likely to select the project that contributes a wider benefit to society. So this benefit can then be claimed as a result of enhancing your value framework to include such items. Moving on to the portfolio perspective. I already talked a fair bit around the benefit available from optimizing rather than prioritizing your plans to produce overall higher value portfolios for the organization. The second box here around optimizing regulatory incentives and penalties. It's actually once you've selected a plan, once you've made your commitments to your regulators or indeed to your shareholders, you can then optimize your performance against the plan. And outperformance can lead to increased incentives, reduced penalties, and I think Greg will talk about that in a bit more detail for NGN's case. Moving on to the portfolio delivery. What's interesting here is actually thinking, well, how does enhancing your planning capability reduce in better delivery capability? And in fact, we've seen multiple examples of this. For example, having a stable plan allows organizations to negotiate better commitment contracts with their supplier. For example, one utility put in their business case the justification for 3% to 5% reduction in supply contracts for materials and network operations, and this equated to multi-million-pound savings. Finally, we reached the process outcomes, and these are perhaps the hardest to quantify, but we're convinced that as a whole, embedding this capability within your organization can lead to improved corporate risk profile, improved stewardship, and improved regulatory outcomes, and ultimately that can lead to improved financial performance for the organization and improved service levels for your customers. Great. So that's the framework. And before handing over to Greg, I'm just going to say a few words around quantifying these benefits. So having understood the different areas, we formed a view of which benefits that can deliver the highest value. We want a means to quantify these, so these can be incorporated into the business case. So for example, staff efficiency can be estimated by considering the number of staff involved in the process, the average loaded salary, and a percentage benefit. This doesn't have to be hard FTE savings. Instead, time can be allocated to higher value tasks, actually making better decisions rather than just grappling with the data. This second example here is again around getting an improvement on that overall plan. In this case here, the key inputs are the size of the investment plan. Typically, organizations will consider what percentage of that is discretionary, and some expenditure will be fixed to a certain extent. And then organizations will look to say, well, what percentage improvement can I make? And for example, from what we've seen with clients, this instance of the negative value investments, a conservative estimate would be to say that you could make a 1% improvement in this area. To validate this framework, so to speak, we held a round table in London a couple of months ago. We held an exercise with 15 asset managers from 8 different organizations. And what we wanted to do was to, firstly, we presented the framework, we got some feedback, it's since evolved, and what I've just presented now is the next iteration on that. But we also asked them to consider which of these benefit areas bring the biggest benefit to their organizations and which are the easiest to quantify. So we considered a simple matrix around the benefit to the organization and the ease of quantification. And then for each of the different areas, it was a post-it type exercise. We looked at where did they, within their organization, what did they see as the most important. And so we analysed that, we looked at the various different groupings, and it's interesting to see the output from that, the average from across all of the organisations that took part. What's interesting on the right-hand side here, the areas that deliver the greatest benefit to the organisation, there's portfolio delivery examples that I talked about, the delivery efficiency as well as the portfolio delivery effectiveness. We had a good example with a US client where they typically under-executed on about 10% of their portfolio. So each year they would plan their work. I think it was around a capital plan of around $200 million. But each year they'd only ever managed to execute 180 million of that. However, having implemented improved planning capability, that issue went away. So the delivery challenge that they had previously had, it wasn't actually an issue related to the delivery organisation. It was actually through better planning and a more stable and consistent plan eradicated that issue altogether. Great. So hopefully that's given you a good introduction to the framework. I'll now hand over to Greg to talk a little bit about Northern Gas experience.
Okay, thanks for that, Stefan, and good afternoon again, everybody. So, as I mentioned previously, and as Stefan's just alluded to, we've been working with Copperleaf for a number of months now on implementing C55. And this is starting to support what we've got internally at NGN, a vision about moving towards conscious decision-making. And by conscious decision-making, we mean making a decision kind of safe in the comfort that we understand the residual risk that we're holding and the benefit that's going to deliver to our stakeholders. And we've selected Copperleaf to support this journey. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about our journey and hopefully some of that resonates with you on the call today. So very briefly, who is NGN? So we're a gas distribution company located in the north of England. We've got approximately 2.7 million customers and a network that consists of 37,000 kilometres of pipes in addition to other infrastructure assets. We also have a range of buildings, fleet and other non-network assets that we maintain. Our primary function is to store and transport gas to our consumers. However, as you can see from the graphic on the screen, the core business and what we focus on is customer service. We're a service company and gas is the product that moves through our assets, and this is how we like to be seen. Just like any logistics company, our focus is going to be on ensuring the integrity of our assets to deliver service to our customers. We invest circa £300 million each year to do this, and based on the recent results, we've got a fairly decent track record in terms of our customer service. We want to be benchmarked as the #1 company or gas distribution company in the UK, and are even setting our sights further afield in the terms of customer service to be benchmarked against the best service companies, not just within the industry or within utilities, but across the globe. So a fairly aspirational vision. And as I said, traditionally we've done this quite well, and we're being benchmarked in the top rankings of our current industry. But we know the world's changing and that we can do this smarter. So we're starting to think about the tools and capability that we need to implement to achieve that for the business. So as I said, NGN, we've got a relentless pursuit to be the best. We drive this through 4 key areas of focus that are both key priorities for the business, but also a part of our regulatory contract. As I alluded to earlier, we're a regulated monopoly, so we work within those regulatory constraints. But these areas of efficiency, customer service, safety, and integrity are what we're funded to deliver for our customers. And we consider that our asset risk management and performance underpins the ability to be efficient safe, deliver customer service, and maintain the integrity of our assets. As I mentioned, to date we've been successful in doing this, but we feel that we've been doing that in kind of pockets of the business, and we're not integrating the capability to achieve this over a longer time period. If I can give you an example, we're a regulated business, so we work in price control periods. As a gas distribution network, it's referred to as GD1, and that covers the period 2013 to 2021. To develop that plan, we relied on a small number of people working on spreadsheets and typically using the safety case of gas explosions to justify investment. And we know that in the changing world that we're working in, this isn't going to be sustainable over the longer time. We need to put more effort and analysis into justifying why we're spending customers' money, the benefit that we're delivering, and the residual risk that we're holding in the business. So as we confront the new challenges, both from a financial point of view, but then also from the environmental point of view with the challenges of climate change, we need to ensure that our asset management approach not only remains valid, but advances to take account of our wider stakeholder needs. And by wider stakeholders, I mean not just customers, but also our shareholders who have got a vested interest in how we manage our assets and making sure that we deliver benefits both to consumers, customers, and also our shareholders. We can also anticipate that given the changing world around us, that the business and operating model that we've been used to over a number of years could potentially change in the future. So in making any decision about intervention or investment with our assets, we need to be cognizant of the trade-off between the current and future risk. So the need to invest now and in the future is really relevant to us at the moment. As I mentioned, our approach to managing risk and opportunity is heavily influenced by the price control period. So a key driver for us is establishing that capability to define our strategic plan and then rolling this out to the business as usual to deliver on those objectives and the program of work that we secure through that regulatory contract. Typically through a price control period, which is where we get our revenue stream, there's a number of incentives that we'd be looking to outperform, and the way in which we can do that is to provide the confidence that we're really taking account of wider consumer risks and benefits as we put our investment plans in place. Given our ambitious to be the best in this, we've got a real ambition in our next price control period to be fast-tracked. Now, whether there's a formal fast-tracked mechanism that's implemented by Ofgem or not, there's still considerable advantage and incentives associated with preparing a robust business plan that I'll start to talk through. And this means we've had to start to make decisions and implement capability to do things differently to what we've done previously. And C55 and working with Copperleaf is one area that's driving this need. So as I mentioned, the price control mechanism controls our revenue stream. Historically, we've been able to use the safety case to support investment, but given these challenges that are coming from in terms of the future of gas being a high-intensity carbon fuel and such, our approach to the next price control is going to have to be very different to what it's been before. And we've started to look at this through the use of C55 and the development of a longer-term strategic asset management plan, trading off economics scenarios and scenario testing using the optimization capabilities Stefan has just previously spoken to trade off the economic and political factors that would need to account for in that future period. As with anything, the system, while I'm a big advocate of the C55 model, we're very cognizant of the fact that that system is only good as the data that we use to populate it. So in addition, or running alongside our work with Copperleaf, we're undergoing a significant data refresh and improvement plan to make sure that the outputs we use from this model to inform our decision making are robust and based on high quality data. We're also conscious of the priorities of our regulator, Ofgem, and wider society, so customer and stakeholder priorities need to be at the heart of our plan and how we propose to deliver benefit over the longer term. And we need to influence a wider range of people. It's not okay anymore just to satisfy the outputs of the Health and Safety Executive or Ofgem. We need to bring local communities and different elements of our consumers into the realm to start to influence our plan. Now, given those four bullet points I've just explained that are on the slide there, what we needed to do was look to something to bring that together as part of a wider framework. And the best fit that we could find and the best people to work with to achieve this is Copperleaf. That we went through a fairly robust procurement process to do that, and given the framework that Stefan's just explained and demonstrated, you can see how the C55 solution does start to address each of those challenges we've posed ourselves there. And what we want is our next regulatory submission not to be a one-off where we secure a stream of revenue or stream of investment, but then the business can go away and outperform. But we really wanted to demonstrate that regulatory submission is just a snapshot of a live investment plan and strategy, not something created as a one-off to satisfy a regulatory need, but our business as usual process that will continually deliver that benefit over the longer term. So if we drill down just one more level and look at this at a business perspective, what we were really looking for was a capability or system that brings a link between asset and investment strategy and embedding investment planning capability within the business. And that was taking account of our policies and inputs, which is a range of economic factors, having the ability to run iterative scenarios or multiple scenarios that describe different futures or different outcomes that we could deliver, linking those with our asset strategies that then translated into kind of asset level investment plans. And you can see there you're moving from a very wide-ranging 10 to 45-year period, narrowed down into what that means to the business at a granular level as they do their day-in, day-out jobs. And we've been working with Copperleaf through their benefits framework to assess that and to understand the asset risk that we hold and how we contribute to that. One thing I'd need to mention, which is a bit of terminology that's going to come up on the next slide, is through our regulator we've been driven to look at what's being called network output measures or NOMs, and that's a monetised risk assessment that's been implemented across energy utilities in the UK to assess that asset level risk. That's being driven through our operating licences and regulatory contracts, and it is a key reporting element both in the present and then also in the future price control periods for our businesses. So that's another driving need to integrating the investment and asset risk scenario planning that we need to do. So in implementing C55, the processes we're looking to support at the highest level is from asset strategy. So moving from an assessment of the baseline risk to understanding how we optimise our asset investment strategies, to develop the intervention outputs that we need to deliver as a business, to ultimately report our network output measures or monetise risk reporting. So at the very high level, we can report how the decisions we make affect the residual risk that we hold and obviously protect the interests of our customers, consumers and also stakeholders. Moving on to the next level of reporting, we start to get down into investment management, and we can look at how that risk position and how our baseline risk will drive decisions into the future. So looking at the concept of how growth impacts our business in the future, the value of our investment projects and investment portfolio analysis that really moves towards developing a a business plan. And you can see those green dots lead or are the incremental steps that we'd use to develop what's called our Rio GD2 business plan development. Now, for those not familiar with the industry or the regulated industry in the UK, Rio refers to the price control elements around revenue, incentives, innovation and outputs. GD2 just is the second gas distribution period for that revenue control. So once you've established your baseline risk and have used that to develop a wide-ranging plan, we can then start to look at how that influences outperformance at a business as usual or operations and delivery level. And this is a natural extension of the C55 model where you're able to move from that wide-ranging strategic level down into the detailed project delivery and then provide the feedback mechanism that updates your asset risk so you can really understand and report at different levels how you're delivering on your outcomes for your regulatory contract, your outcomes and incentives for your shareholders, and then also the benefits for the customers. So on paper, that's a really neat way to describe how we've gone about setting up our system to deliver that benefit. But we needed to obviously convince both our internal and external decision makers that we're going through the right process and how you get a system such as this into the business to enable that change to happen. So in developing our business case and understanding what benefits this would deliver, we outlined a number of valued benefits that we could really demonstrate and quantify, and then also unvalued benefits. So the valued benefits, as I talked about previously, was looking at fast track allowance, so less of a regulatory burden and improved incentives as we went through that process with our regulator. We also could quantify a certain level of outperformance in delivering our business plan, whether that be through efficiency in staff, and that's not a headcount reduction. We've not used this as a need for a headcount reduction, but more in the efficiency of processes that have traditionally been done on paper or within spreadsheets. The use of a slick system and controlled process orientated system enabled that efficiency and outperformance with our resource, both through the asset risk reporting process and our business plan development. And as we've been implementing this with Copperleaf, we're starting to see a greater number of synergies and duplication that we can really start to optimize within the system to drive further savings. We also worked with our Treasury Department to look at the insurance premium savings that we could quantify as a part of that case. In terms of undervalued benefits, or not undervalued, unvalued benefits, a key one there was our reputation with Ofgem. Ofgem, as the regulator, are really looking for confidence in how the companies and businesses invest to make sure they're taking account of the balance of risk, expenditure and service, and providing that confidence within the plan, in addition to developing asset management capabilities. So we need to demonstrate or justify to Ofgem that we're implementing robust asset management strategies in the best interest of our consumers, while balancing the returns that we need to provide to shareholders as well. So Stefan's talked to you briefly through the benefits case that he's described in terms of the framework from C55. So what I've done, and I'm going to briefly talk through just in the next minute or so, is how I've mapped the benefits to that slide. So when we talk about efficiency through the plan development, efficiency in annual reporting, we spend a lot of time going through and checking data spreadsheets to satisfy an output of our regulator annually. And what we've been able to quantify as a result of working with the C55 is a 3% increase in efficiency across the teams required to report on the plan, And this is actually, in real terms, meant that we've been able to free up 2 technical resources to go and work in other areas of the businesses without the need to backfill. So we're not strictly a headcount reduction, we've avoided the need to recruit as well, which is a really positive aspect of this project. We also quantified a 15% increase in efficiency for the teams that are required to develop the plan for the next cycle. So in addition to the 2 FTEs that have moved into that role, we can get that efficiency in just running this process through a slick model rather than a number of spreadsheets that are being operated in isolation. We've also quantified the reduction in work from a fast-tracked business plan or a high-confidence business plan. This would avoid the need for the back and forth question and answer with the regulator on further information or justification required, which is quite a significant investment on our part in previous price controls. And the implementation of this system and the demonstration of confidence in robust asset management planning will enable us to avoid that rework. As I mentioned, we've got insurance premium cost saving, which is the 3% in insurance savings, which obviously significant costs to businesses such as ours, and that's the cost saving and avoidance that we've been able to quantify. In delivering the program, we can outperform at a high level benefit of about £10 million by implementing these processes. That's more of a future benefit that we're looking to realise, and that will be in addition to the streamlined efficiency, choosing the right investments and delivering bulk risk removal from the interventions that we choose through optimising rather than prioritising, which kind of adds weight to what Stefan had talked through previously around optimisation and prioritisation. And the fast-track regulatory submission, we're heading into a challenging price control where our regulator's looking to kind of tighten down on returns to shareholders and maximise improvements and benefits to customers. So using a tool such as C55, we're able to provide that confidence that we're delivering that and should be able to demonstrate efficiency through the delivery of interventions, optimization of robustly costed investments, and also a real justification of the need as to why we need to invest in the first place. As I mentioned before, the unvalued benefits sit broadly within this framework and improve reputation and is held in very high regard by our shareholders and by the business. So we'll be looking to kind of build on that with Ofgem, build internal confidence and external confidence in our plan, and develop the next generation of asset managers that are really increasingly look to deliver value from an asset base rather than just operating an asset to deliver a determined output. We're really focusing on delivering that value that we need to for our consumers. So that's briefly, I suppose, some of our benefits, the driving need behind moving and working with Copperleaf, some of the benefits we've started to realise and the kind of pathway we're on to lead towards better asset management practice within NGN. So I think back over to yourself, Stefan, for any questions.
Great, thanks, Greg.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for your presentations. We do have a number of audience questions, so I'm going to dive straight in. Stefan, this one is for yourself. In the presentation, you mentioned that taking an analytics approach to asset management versus a traditional prioritisation approach could increase portfolio value by 7 to 20%. The question is, how much of this was measured as being actually delivered and how much was estimated as potential?
Mm-hmm. So the numbers here, the 7 to 20%, came from a research study we completed together with the University of Southampton, and so it was a desk-based exercise. So it wasn't real numbers, so to speak, from organisations. But the purpose of doing this was in reality to move away from those specific examples that we've seen to try and provide representative numbers that could be applicable to any organisation. So what we did is we actually carried out essentially a Monte Carlo simulation by developing multiple portfolios, comparing the optimization, the prioritization multiple times, and these numbers, the 7 to 20%, was the average improvement over multiple different examples. We do have there's a detailed paper behind this that we can provide to anyone that's interested.
Another question, how does the benefits model system help you identify previously unknown risks?
I guess identifying previously unknown risks is in reality around embedding the right processes, and the tool is simply facilitating this. So if I take two quite different examples from our clients here in the UK, at Anglian Water, engineers have a simple input tool on their mobile devices, and they can highlight emerging risks out in the field and capture these in an enterprise tool rather than just keeping them in their head. So that's a way that previously unknown risks can be brought to the attention of the investment planning teams and be considered as candidates for investment. So that's very much a kind of a process example. At Northern Gas, to give a different view of that, the quite detailed asset modelling a little bit that Greg described, based on the various asset characteristics such as age and location or pipe diameter and material, for example, will highlight the riskiest assets, or at least the riskiest assets on paper. And then these can be considered and appropriate risk mitigation activities proposed. But perhaps if you weren't carrying out that modelling, someone wouldn't have known that there was in fact a very risky asset under the ground in a particular location.
Thank you. And one more question for you, Stefan. How do you include significant non-financial benefits in the benefit model framework?
I guess the issue of non-financial benefits is something we consider when developing value frameworks for our clients. It's not specific to capability improvement in the process that we focused on today. For example, how do you value employee satisfaction, for example? There's various ways of looking at it. For example, how much would you as an organisation pay to improve your employee satisfaction KPI by 5% or 10%? Perhaps none of these methods are perfect. It's tricky, these unfinancial benefits. But we're looking to find solutions that are going to work and provide a kind of a justifiable basis that will work in your organisation. And often it's not rocket science. There isn't a complicated formula sitting behind it. But we look for approaches that have worked, that you're able to embed in your processes. And that's what we can bring. We can bring examples that have used elsewhere that our clients currently use, and we tend to find solutions that work with our clients.
Great. Greg, I have a couple of questions for you. Obviously, you implemented C55 at Northern Gas Networks, and I'm just interested to know a little bit about that process. How was it transitioning from spreadsheets, you mentioned a couple of times, to a system, an analytics-led system? How was that change management handled at Northern Gas Networks?
Thanks, Rose. I'll be honest, it's a process that's still ongoing. But what I've noticed with Northern Gas Networks in my time here, and when I started in 2015, it was the start of this journey, and there was people were crying out for the change because the frustration with spreadsheets and the like were making jobs difficult and causing errors. But in saying that, I think we've had a fairly big turnover of staff from early retirement, so over 55 people that have been in the industry a long time have been starting to be replaced with as a kind of mentioned at the end of the presentation, a new mould of asset managers that are starting to use these systems and tools to make better decisions. So it's a bit of a balance between the new and the old, so not losing that engineering experience as we transition to these new tools. And I'd not want to say that the tool replaces that engineering judgment. It's a decision support tool that provides information for our engineers and our gas managers to make a decision or a more informed decision. So the change is still ongoing. We've had great enthusiasm from the business to implement this change, albeit there's some education in the new models that needs to be embedded through that process.
You also mentioned about you're doing a data refresh and that your conscious decision making is only as good as the data that's being fed in to the framework. What advice would you have for others who equally need to clean up the data?
Where do I start? I think it's having a clear the best thing is having a clear framework within which you can work. So a clear asset hierarchy, clean data, and communicating to the business the importance of data. I think often it's overlooked as something that someone will just collect and it will be there. But good quality data is worth its weight in gold. The flip side is poor quality data, leads to really poor decisions that cost your business a lot of money. So I think our learning experience is at the very outset or before you start, as soon as possible, start investing in the data and the quality of data collected. And to do that, you need to engage your people at every level within the organisation. It can't just be a direction from the top down, you need to do this. We need to educate all of those people that are out on the tools or collecting data in various forms, the importance of that data and how it's used to, in the instance of my company, to secure a revenue stream through the regulated price control period.
Thank you. We're a little over our time, but we will squeeze in one more question. Stefan, this is for you. How does bottom-up risk capture interface with existing deterioration models?
Well, good. Getting into the details to finish off with. There's different approaches how this can be managed, and typically what we as Copperleaf is we're trying to get the balance between kind of the generic model view of the world, which is coming from the deterioration models, and the view from the engineers from the planners out in the field. And it's a balance, but one of the approaches is kind of having an iterative process as part of that planning cycle, where you take a view looking at the deterioration models, compare that and contrast that with the input that's coming from the field, and ultimately we're wanting to combine them both into the plan that is not only going to be addressing and enhancing the nature of your asset base according to the models, but it's also taking the inputs from the field, and ultimately is leading to the projects which will drive the greatest benefit to the organisation. So it's not simple, but we work with our clients to develop that process and to understand how it's best going to work for them.
Thank you. Thank you both for very insightful presentations and answers. Remember, you can watch this webinar and the previous Copperleaf webinar that Stefan mentioned on value decision-making frameworks on demand on Engerati. Thank you for tuning in today. Goodbye.